Hi, I'm Bill Blain, strategist here at Shard Capital in London. We're now into the 10th week of the coronavirus crisis, and I'm very much afraid that everything has shaped up exactly the way we thought it would. The virus has now transmogrified itself into a global financial crisis. We're now seeing confidence in stock markets evaporating as it becomes clear there is nothing that central banks can do in terms of simply dropping interest rates to get people travelling again, and there is nothing that governments are able to do to stop the infection rates soaring rapidly. The kind of thing we've seen in Italy, where hospitals have been swamped, hints at what is inevitably going to happen to the rest of the Occidental world, and that's as true as it is in Germany and the UK as it's going to be in the US. The question though for markets is, where do we go from here? We've seen some dramatic up and down moves in the stock markets, but I'm afraid it all looks like a succession of dead cat bounces. Things have now changed. Last night, the US president got on the wires and spoke to the American people, telling them that he was going to stop this foreign infection spread by Europeans setting up clusters throughout America had to stop. Therefore, he's effectively closing the borders. Well, it did nothing to help. He hasn't put in motion the key fiscal and economic and lending things that will be needed to keep the economy from sliding into trouble. And by that I mean things like ensuring that banks aren't going to foreclose on mortgages, that people can continue to get paid if they have to work from home or self-isolate. There are so many things we are learning about this crisis, but I'm afraid from here it's likely to get worse before it gets better. Now let's start off by talking about why it's going to get better, and that's because containment has been shown to work. In China, in Italy, you've had very strict containment measures in the places where it has broken out the worst, Wuhan and also in northern Italy. And what we're seeing now in northern Italy is the infection rates have tumbled. Death rates have tumbled, and we're practically at zero new infections. Now, if containment had been properly enacted elsewhere, what we would have seen is, rather than a very steep growth, a more shallow growth in the numbers of infections, which would have meant that hospitals would be able to cope better. We wouldn't see people being triaged in the corridors, and as a result, you'd see less fear and panic in the markets. That all would have been good. But that, unfortunately, is not the way it's going to play out. Now, we are particularly worried about what's going to happen in the US, and I'm afraid I'm going to be controversial there by laying all the blame at the two left feet of President Donald J. Trump. Why? Well, it was Donald who got on the wires and told us right at the beginning of the crisis that it was more fake news. He told us that the Chinese disease was just a Chinese flu, and then he's been telling us that it's going to disappear anyway. Come the spring, it would go, and that America is so great and so special that it doesn't have to worry. Well, there's another expression that Donald should know, and that's that Americans always do the right thing after exhausting every other possibility, and Donald Trump has pretty much effectively exhausted all the possibilities by doing everything wrong that could have been done to address the crisis. He hasn't provided strategic leadership. He did not ensure that there was lockdown and containment. There hasn't been a program of testing to any substantial effect, and there hasn't been really any effort to trace and source where the infection is being spread and by whom. Yeah, sure, he closed the borders to China, but didn't stop the Chinese coming in through other places, for instance, flying to Hong Kong and Singapore. The fact is, the virus, like it is in Europe, the virus will be established in the US. But unlike Europe, where everyone has access to free health and free testing, in the States, workers are going to be very loath to admit they have the disease. They're going to continue going to the office or the factory and continue spreading the disease in the office or the factory or on their way to work. As a result, it is inevitable that we're going to see infections rise, and it's inevitable that we're going to see the death rate rise. Unfortunately, what happened in the States is that Donald Trump took the gamble earlier this year that America would remain immune to the virus, pretty much the same way we saw happen with the last flu fears with SARS and MERS. They never turned into the kind of pandemic this has become. Now, the effect on that is going to be multiple. We're going to see a crisis in US hospitals, which are not well prepared for this. I'm sorry to be blunt about it, but this is going to hurt in America. As a result, you're going to see people looking for someone to blame, and I reckon that person will be Trump. And that changes the equation come the election at the end of the year. It certainly plays into the demands of socialist candidate Bernie Sanders and his desire to see a proper healthcare system free for all in the US. Now, that's always received pushback, but that is going to look very attractive to a lot of people. So where do markets go from here? At the moment, there is no clear sign of a bottom. But we do know that people will recover, that it is going to be a limited number of people who suffer mortality as a result of this, and we will see the virus slow down once the warmer weather comes. If containment has worked and people don't reinfect other people, then we'll start to see recovery. But the fact is, this is going to come back, probably in October. And it's at least going to be 18 months before we see a serious vaccine. That's going to lead to all kinds of consequences, which will continue for the global economy in terms of supply chain, import and export slowdowns. We are certainly not out of the woods yet, and I predict there is certainly more pain to come for stock markets, and especially in the bond market, where corporates are desperately trying to mop up as much liquidity, cash, as they can. That's why Boeing has used all its banking lines. That's why other companies are scrambling to get more money, because they're scared they're not going to be able to. And that is bound to create a credit crunch where we see loads of companies downgraded to junk, at which point investors have to sell. It's still going to get worse before it gets better. The great news though is, and I can tell you this having seen every single financial crash since 1987, things do get better eventually. We just don't know exactly what the path is or how long it's going to take yet.